Yesterday, Farron Cousins sat down with Gasland Director Josh Fox to talk about the EPA's recent announcement on fracking pollution. Let's take a look at that conversation.
So, Josh, about a week ago, we finally get the EPA report on, the true effects of fracking on groundwater, drinking water. The headlines all over the place tell us basically the EPA says fracking is not polluting our water. And once you actually read the report and see what the EPA has to say, that's not the case at all, is it?
No. This is one of those strange instances where the headlines were actually kind of like a Rorschach test. You can look at this EPA report and see anything you want in it, because the headlines that the EPA put out, right, on their press statement, which is often the only thing that people read because the report itself is like 1,000 pages long and kind of scientific and full of that type of lingo and, scientific reports. The headlines say, EPA says no widespread contamination of fracking, of water, groundwater due to fracking. But when you actually look in the report, there are many concrete examples of actual, very damning evidence against fracking in the sense that it proves that fracking contaminates groundwater. And then when you look even deeper into it, you find out that EPA did not have a widespread basis of data for their study. So there's no possible way to make a conclusion that there's no widespread contamination if they did not have a wide focus. The focus of this report was actually quite limited. And actually Media Matters and a number of other media watchdog groups came out with reports the very next day that said the media has gotten this completely wrong. Time, Newsweek, Washington Post have said no widespread contamination due to fracking. Well, meanwhile, inside the report, it says exactly the opposite. It says that fracking very much does cause water contamination. And if you look at the history of this type of reporting, the industry was very fond of saying there's not a single case of groundwater contamination due to fracking, right? So now, oh, by the way, we were wrong. There's lots of contamination due to fracking. We've seen it in the very EPA report itself. We see it in PA, we see it in Colorado, we see it in Texas, we see it in North Dakota. That's pretty widespread to me, actually, if you think about it, all over the country. But lo and behold, now it's moving the goalposts. So we say there's contamination, but we're going to say, oh, well, it's not widespread.
Well, and part of the problem we have is that the fracking industry does not necessarily disclose, the chemicals that they're pumping into the ground. And so when we do studies, when we get water samples and we say, okay, well, we found, benzene and all sorts of other chemicals, the fracking industry doesn't have to admit if it's theirs or not. I mean, isn't that, one of the issues that we have here?
Hitting the nail on the head, right? There's a fundamental dishonesty going on here, right? Which we've seen over and over and over again with the EPA. It's part of a pattern. And it's particularly weird and ironic that I'm talking about this in 2015, because in 2013, I put out a 3-year investigation called Gasland Part 2 into this very phenomenon of how the EPA was going into communities, saying, oh, we're here to solve the problem, we're here to help you. And a lot of those scientists on the ground were wonderful and amazing and did in-depth work. And then, lo and behold, the front office at EPA comes out with something that says something completely different. In Dimock, Pennsylvania, we had EPA investigate and then come out with a press release that said Dimock water is safe on the same day that they delivered letters to people in Dimock that said, don't drink your water because you have all these contaminants in it related to fracking. You had the same thing happen in Pavilion, Wyoming. EPA comes out and says, there's contamination due to fracking, only to reverse that situation later. Weatherford, Texas, same thing. This is a pattern with the Obama administration EPA. You'd think that, when they come out with these statements, that there's a level of trust that you have to have. But that's not what's happening. And at the basis of this dishonesty is the very fact that, yes, just as you mentioned, the EPA, no one can find out what these companies are doing in terms of injecting materials into the ground because they're exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act. When they're exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act, that means they are exempt from the reporting requirements to the EPA of the chemicals they're pumping in the ground. So when the EPA will go into some location, someplace, they kind of have to guess what might be there. And you can imagine that testing process is so much more difficult and much, much more expensive than if they knew beforehand, oh, in this place, this company injected, a benzene derivative. This company injected some kind of corrosion inhibitor. This company injected, ethylene glycols, and they could test for that. Instead, you have to go out and do hundreds of invent new tests to figure out what's going on. EPA can't enforce Safe Drinking Water Act regulations because they're exempt. So that's at the basis of this nonsense and very, very Orwellian situation.
And right now we have the Republicans in Congress that are trying to weaken the EPA's ability, one, to really do anything. They're specifically targeting the clean water. They're specifically targeting the clean air. They just slashed their budget in the subcommittee by another 9%, taking them down to below 1989 levels. So, they're crippling the EPA that's already not doing anything about the situation. And, furthermore, when we talk about the dishonesty, I think a large part of it has to do with the media. First of all, they all got the headlines wrong about this story, and most people, unfortunately, are not going to see the reporting that Media Matters did showing why this is wrong. And one of those people who will not read that is Stuart Varney. You had the opportunity, you spoke with him, and I apologize for you having to do that, about a week ago. Let's take a look at what happened in that clip.
There are 470 scientific reports right now, peer-reviewed, that state that fracking contaminates groundwater, that's bad for the air, it's bad for public health.
I'm wrong about lighting the tap water before fracking ever appeared.
You are absolutely
I'm not,
wrong.
because I did it myself.
Because what we're talking about...
I did it myself.
I do believe you are lying right now.
Lying?
Because the point... Yes, I do.
The interview's over, young man. The interview is over. I am not lying.
Okay.
I did it myself.
If you said to me earlier that you would not want fracking in your own neighborhood...
You're out of here, son.
It's irresponsible for you to say
you are
on air
out of here.
That the rest of America should frack.
Don't call me a liar. Don't do that, son.
Well,
Don't do it.
You're clearly obfuscating the truth over and over again during this segment.
That's it.
So, Josh, Stuart Varney, I guess, is the hipster of fracking because he's been lighting his tap water on fire long before we knew any of this.
Right.
Tell us what exactly happened in that conversation there.
Okay, so I have to preface this by saying I don't ever get asked to go on Fox News. Very, very, very rarely. It's because there was a producer at that program that was new that had come from a different station that had booked me often. And so I said, all right, what the hell? I'm going to go on because I'm really worried about it. Nobody was reporting on this, So Stuart Varney, right before I go on, admits to the fact that he has land in Delaware County, New York, in upstate New York. To me, he has a house there. And that of course, they're not fracking there. And I don't think they should. And I thought, did this guy just say that he doesn't want fracking in his backyard? And so we had a little conversation about this. And it comes out, yes, because he lives in the watershed, right? So then he starts his report saying that the EPA says it's all safe and it's all fine and just go frack anywhere you want because it doesn't affect groundwater. And I have to counter that, which is what I've been doing to try to correct the record on this report. And then, he gets rather belligerent, starts interrupting me, all these kind of things. And then, I couldn't believe I outed him. I said, you just said in the commercial break, I'm a reporter. That wasn't off the record. That was just like on the commercial break, like that you don't want fracking in your neighborhood. And then he says on air, because I'm in the watershed. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, are you kidding me? And so I call him out on it, not just because that was an individual lie, but because that type of thing is the bigger lie that the fossil fuel industry has been saying over and over and over and over and over again. Sure, there are some instances of water contamination that may not have to do with fracking. I mean, there's tons of water contamination that has nothing to do with fracking. But to point to that and say, oh, that has nothing to do with that, therefore all things that are fracking related are untrue is the much, much bigger lie. To say something like, oh, well, you got lung cancer, but you never smoked, therefore no one who smokes gets lung cancer, is completely crazy. And that's what the tobacco industry was saying for decades. And that was a very effective strategy. So what you do when you do that is you send people down a rabbit hole. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole with Stuart Varney. I don't want to be, in that type of dialogue. I want to talk about what things that are verifiable and scientific. And we know from the EPA report, fracking causes groundwater contamination. We know from whistleblowers that the Obama administration told EPA scientists not to tell the truth because it would affect Obama's 2012 election chances. This is not speculation. These were things that were said. We know from a FOIA, from Greenpeace, dozens of documents which show industry influence into that EPA report that just came out, undue influence for the industry. These are not things that I'm making up or supposing or thinking about. These are actually things that if you look at the record, if you look at the reporting, if you do a simple Google search, you can find these kinds of things out. And it's in line with all the things that I've experienced over the last 6 years of reporting on this issue.
Josh Fox, thank you for everything you do, and keep fighting. We'll definitely check back in with you in the weeks to come.
All right, I appreciate it so much. Thanks.
Thank you.